It's so cool. So for people, I guess for people that don't, that maybe don't know much about you, and for people that do, like how did you end up? Like, take that for an example. Like, how did you end up in this community? Was it one you already were part of, or did you seek it out and kind of embed yourself?
Well, I think what's interesting listening to Ed is that when you look at the overall picture of something, and obviously in my case, at least back on it, you can see a very linear kind of thread that goes through, but actually what you're dealing with and what I was dealing with was my own life. You know, it was my life, and everyone there experienced what they're experiencing from different angles and for different reasons. And personally, I was not particularly happy at home. So and there was this wonderful thing, which I'm sure people from Brighton know all about, which is the squatting scene. And that was another big thing for, you know, the progression of music in London. So I left home young, no qualifications or anything, and went to live in the squatting scene in London. And that was an amazing in for someone from the countryside or from what I now know is a very broken kind of society to something that I wasn't expecting, but once I arrived there, I knew how much I needed it, which was an extended family and a community based around completely different ideals from what I'd been brought up with and what I thought was on offer. So how did I end up there? Through the squatting scene and going to, I'm 50, so it was the end of I'll get in trouble for that, but the kind of punk era. So a lot of the music I was going to see was sort of based around punk and hardcore and American hardcore, and then kind of dub reggae nights and that kind of thing. And then I'm kind of going to disagree a little bit about the ecstasy thing, because the ecstasy hit town. And suddenly it was incredibly enjoyable to listen to repetitive beat. And I remember the first night, it's kind of crazy, and again, you know, looking back, you see things so differently. So when I was young, like, everyone was taking speed, right, because it was really cheap, and weirdly, really pure, probably because it was so cheap, no one bothered cutting it with anything. So we were all doing speed and, you know, and acid, you know, quite terrified of this thing called E that I'd heard about, and it was like, oh no, don't do that, you know, like that's, you know, dangerous and you overheat, and taking acid. And I just remember going to the first club, and I don't know what I did, no idea obviously, but I do remember thinking, this is really weird, but I'm standing on this sort of one metre square of dance floor. I'm not moving. I love it. The only other place I want to go is the women's toilets, which all you women probably will know. And, you know, this has gone on, not just on the rave scene. Women's toilets are amazing places sometimes. On ecstasy, they're incredible. And that was it. So and now you're all welcome. So, anyway, yeah. So I was dedicated from that moment, and went from attending raves to putting them on.
Yeah, and then were you into photography before that, at the time? Like, what? I'm sure you've been asked these a lot of times because you've been you've been doing it for
never remember what I said.
Okay, cool. Like what, like you started documenting it as we all do now. You know, we document our subcultures, our youth culture, our culture, whatever it is, with our phones. But you were doing it. Perhaps, I think you might have been one of the only people taking these types of photos in that community at these events. You know,
yeah.
Is that fair to say? Like, what compelled you?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I might be labelled something these days, but I found it quite comfortable to have a camera with me, and I'd learned from my dad, who took photographs, and we developed black and white photographs in the kind of toilet under the stairs together, and I learned from him exactly how not to take photographs, because any time he picked up the camera, it was absolutely excruciating, and he'd make you sit still and look at the camera, and he would kind of just say, well, why are you putting that face? Or, just awful. The whole thing was awful, and it was very like this, and sometimes he'd come and sit in it as well with this like long cord and this sort of squeezy thing. Oh, it's just awful. But he, at the same time, I was aware of this amazing medium, and he gave me a little camera, and it was an Instamatic, and that's all I've really ever used since then. A slightly fancier one now, but so it came from there. So and I always had this. I don't know. I think that for me, photography was just about capturing something. And I know I was supposed to be living life for the moment, and it's definitely from the punks that brought me up in squats and people on a lot of drugs like to live life for the moment. But for me, I just had to keep it, had to keep hold of it, and to capture that light and the emotion. And you look at one of those 6x4 images that we all got from Boots, and you know what happened before it, you know what happened after, you know about that dog, you know, it's just an incredible way of remembering things. So that was how it started.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the punk and hardcore scene, the squatter scene, like is your kind of in or indirect in that you ended up where you were. Like it does remind me of what Ed was saying about like a kind of coalition that formed, or not coalition, it's the wrong word, but like a merging of free party culture and kind of rockers and that, and then dance music, which if you go to prison, which is over there, you might not realise, prison, I'm using that example because it's near here, but you go to a super club or whatever, or mainstream club, you don't realise the kind of punk and counterculture really edge to it. Like, is that how you've both seen it? Like, is that how you both see it?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of kind of examples of separate DIY cultures feeding into dance music. Punk is one example. The other one that I always really enjoy is the number of early acid house producers who had previous lives as breakdancers. So a guy called Gerald, Liam Howlett from the Prodigy. There's like this really interesting thread of like loads of people who started breakdancing as like kids and teenagers, and then got into acid house through that. And it's not necessarily a scene that you would automatically directly associate, but like something about that kind of grassroots DIY culture, that kind of forming of a team often, like a kind of collective identity, and that applies equally to punk and hardcore and those sorts of scenes. Yeah, it's the same sort of social organising units transferred across between different genres.
Yeah, and also the emotional side of it. I mean, we're all humans, and we like to gather, we like to be on our own as well, but it's such a deep human sort of desire to gather and sort of stomp around and listen to music, I suppose, that it's always going to happen in different forms. But I think going back to the more hardcore scenes and the original travellers that you mentioned that sort of took on all the traditional festivals around, from pagan times that have followed through, and then this somewhat there wasn't always the most friendly coming together of these sort of young people that wanted to play techno, and the travellers, but they almost seemed to like hate the fact that they actually really enjoyed the rave. So you kind of turn up at one of these festivals, and they'd have brilliant like little stages, and they were really together, and there'd be someone like with like food, extraordinary, and and anyway they would play a lot of their traditional bands and stuff like that, and then the bands would kind of like fall like special brew style sort of to the sides, and then the ravers would kind of come through and start playing the techno, and I think what's important to remember is that when you're talking about the dance music scene and these big raves and stuff, maybe in clubs and commercial raves that was all about techno and dance music, but actually if you went to an illegal rave, that was one part of the event. So you would quite often start off with in the early days punk bands and stuff like that, and then you'd have your techno, and definitely by sort of 8-9 in the morning it would be the hip hop sets, and the ending up with the reggae sets and the dub reggae, and then often back to a bit of punk on Sunday night, really like if you were still going. So yeah, it's not as simple as maybe.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned breakdancing because people were breakdancing in your film, and there was a glimpse there, and I was like, wow, you don't But then as soon as I saw it, I thought, well, techno and people body popping and stuff. If you look at like 80s in America, you look at Chicago House and some techno and stuff. People are popping sometimes to it because it's kind of like robotic music, right?
Yeah, they're the good dancers. The good thing about techno is you didn't have to be a good dancer. But yeah, he was a boy from Nottingham actually. Yeah.
He was a good breaker.
Yeah. Massive attitude, but really funny. Yeah.
So I'm interested in. So I'm just flicking through some of your photos. I'm interested in
That's actually in Brighton.
Was it? Whereabouts?
A traveller site somewhere out on the outskirts of Brighton.
Wow.
I can remember.
I'm interested in so you're a group of mates and you've got this a sound system or a couple of sound systems. What was the compulsion to travel around and risk getting fines or risk getting put in prison? What was the compulsion to do that, to travel around with your sound system and then you did leave the UK and go around Europe? What was there sorry, I'll reframe my question. Were there central tenets of why you were doing that? Was it we want to do this because of this?
Okay, so you've got to divide it up a little. So there were different sound systems doing different nights, and if you think about a year, a lot of weeks, a lot of weekends. So we were doing parties every weekend, and what you basically had was a group of people. I'm sure a lot of you know, but a group of people that would come together and buy some speakers, and usually find a squatted venue or go and squat a venue and put on a night. So. But obviously, as with all groups of people, they're all very different. I've got a friend of mine here that was in a sound system with me many years ago, and we were we were really rubbish, but in a really fun way. So all our backdrops were we paint them on paper and stuff, and they I think we called it the large salad at one point. It was LSD, but it was really funny. And we were a bit untogether and a bit punk and a bit interesting, and so we would do little parties, and people would hear about our parties, and they'd come to that, or then you would have all different sorts, but at the time there was a sound system called Spiral Tribe, so they were the ones that tried to open it up a bit and be much more politicised than the rest of us, and they were on a proper mission to bring free music to the people, and what basically happened was every weekend we're trying to put on parties, and it was really easy in the beginning because the police didn't know what hit him. And then, as you say, all these laws start coming in. This is before 1994 though, but little things, and the police start getting organised. But we're still doing it every weekend. So you're still putting out a lot of raves all over Britain. But what's happening is the police are getting more and more organised. So the quality of your night out is getting much more determined by when the police are going to stop it. So it got to the point that you would hardly even get to these raves half the time. So, you would just be driving towards them and you get nicked, or, it was just, we were spending, as people that ran sound systems, we were spending a lot of time in police stations, and it just got really tedious. And then we heard about France, which was the same size population, but double the amount of land. And we were like, okay, an innocent country we could go and invade. and it was brilliant. It was amazing. And then, so a lot of us went abroad. Some of the British sound systems were a bit like quitters, but we wanted to put on raves. So, and then we found all these people out there that were doing it. So all these French sound systems and German sound systems, Austrian sound systems, and so then we started this whole nomadic lifestyle, which was going up to Berlin and places like that in the summer when it was warm enough, and then everyone going down to Portugal in the winter, and doing separate events in the winter because there weren't enough people, and then in the summer everyone coming together to do these massive technicals. So this is a technical in France. And then it was like there was this entertainment always with anything to do with like what I wanted to say as well is the element of joy. You know, the element of joy, the subversiveness of joy and having fun and playing is a really important part of human nature, and that's another thing that we provided and that we all know we need. And that was also this kind of bubble that protected us from the authorities in a lot of ways. So we would do things like, this is an old CRS French bus, if you know anything about the French police, which hopefully you don't. Their riot division is called the CRS, and they're hardcore. These are like massive bulletproof buses, and they were selling them off, so we would go and buy them. So we'd have these sound systems set up, and the police would turn up, and they'd be like, we know we're not going to get in that, but... And it was the older version, which was much more hardcore than the new ones. Anyway, that was in the CRS bus.
And it reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you actually with Vinca's journey outside of the UK. It kind of worms almost, but like your book charts the history of dance music in the UK, but like did you do say our neighbouring European countries, did they have the same journey with dance music from your research, or did they emulate the journey of the UK, or was it a totally different thing? Like, what did you look into?
Out with my remit slightly. So part of it's specifically and solely just the UK. I think if I tried to do the whole of Europe, I would have gone even more insane than I did already. No, I mean, from what I understand, Vinc is absolutely right. That kind of shift occurs in the kind of early to mid 90s as the police get more organised, as heavier fines start coming in. After Castle Morton, 13 members of Spiral Tribe were arrested and charged. Their trial ended up being a bit of a farce. They ended up being acquitted after one of the senior police officers for West Mercia Police took to the stand and said, "Oh no, they didn't have anything to do with it. I told the convoy to go on to Castle Morton Common." So completely inadvertently blew the prosecution's case apart. I chatted to Mark from Spiral Tribe, who said that they basically spent the entire trial kind of undermining it, very sort of Abby Hoffman style. You've seen the trial of the Chicago 9. At one point they were all in holding cells beneath the courtroom and realised that they could spring the locks on their cell doors with the little plastic stirrers they'd been given for their cups of tea. So as soon as the guards were out of the room, they'd like spring the locks and then they'd stop moving people around. So when the guards came back in, they were like, sure. Eventually at one point, they put everyone in the same room, waiting for the guards to come back, and then afterwards they just left the doors unlocked and they could just and then people squatted the building behind the courtroom and just started playing nosebleed techno all hours of the day and night. They had all of Spiral Tribe supporters in the public gallery wearing t-shirts saying "make some fucking noise." And Mark describes the judge, who's this sort of like gammon-faced headmastery type, making a call and saying, "By order of the court, take those t-shirts off." Which everybody duly did and didn't have anything on, particularly including the women. So the judge beetroot kind of put those t-shirts back on. And so the whole thing just kind of fell apart. But the broader climate was definitely one of aggression, of narrowing the spaces in which these parties could occupy. Spiral Tribe in particular, as Vinca said, were very noisy. I interviewed someone who had kind of the alternate perspective. Spiral Tribe are kind of generally held up as these kind of exemplars of the free party ethos. They went louder and harder and faster than anyone else. And I spoke to someone who was also kind of on the free party scene, and her take was, well, they ruined it for everyone. Their press releases lauded the fact that their sound system could be heard 12 miles away. It's like, well, you're drawing way too much attention. People who've been part of the squatting scene, the free party scene for years, know that in order for it to survive, it's got to operate at a lower level. You can't draw too much heat to yourself, otherwise, like, the whole thing falls apart. And that's kind of what happened, at least for those kind of huge Castle Morton scale free parties.
I think that happens now. Like, you see illegal raves happening now, and it's like 200 people in the field, 300 people, like if most 1,000, but very rarely. It's like, that's a good way to just crack on and do it, and then, because it's not like a massive, let's try and get as many people here. It's like 200 people in Middlesbrough. which happened recently. Like you think like that's kind of great. That's like the police. It's not big enough to draw attention. Maybe that's learning from the mistakes of Custom Martin or what have you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, lots of free party sound systems moved to Europe in the early 90s, but free parties didn't stop. You can set your clock every 18 months or so. There'll be a broadsheet newspaper article declaring the return of the illegal rave. There was a lot of noise about illegal raves coming back during lockdown. But if you look at kind of the history of articles about it, there's a Guardian article about illegal raves making a comeback from February 2020, the month before lockdown restrictions come in. And then there's another article in the Times kind of 6 months before that. And then there's something in Vice in 2016. There's this sort of constant thread all the way through where this culture gets rediscovered every year and a half or so. And the only conclusion you can draw from that is that illegal raving's never gone away. It's just not at a scale that Guardian columnists tend to notice. And yeah, it operates very much as a subculture in that it's out of sight with very, very small community groups. It's just kind of evolved and shifted to reflect the pressures placed upon it.
Yeah.
I think what strikes me about the selection of photos that you sent me, Vinca, is this was a good example. Is that like of someone who photographed something where there's a lot of activity and there's loads of people and there's a lot of stimulation come from all, there's music, there's people. A lot of these photos in the selection seem very quiet and kind of, it's kind of like if I said to someone, there's some photos from someone who used to, be part of an illegal rave sound system. Their image in their mind might not be this. Like, what drew you to these rather than, hundreds of people in France going wild? Or maybe did you do both?
Well, there's a few different ways of answering that, but to keep it succinct, I think that on a personal level, I was a bit sick of the boys and their sound systems, and it was like DJ moments, and it's all about the speakers. And the only photographs that anyone really ever wanted me to take were of their speakers. So my very political title of the book, No System, also meant that there's very few sound systems in the book. And what I was actually really interested in was the way of life that I found, and that was what I wanted to share with the wider world, and that was kind of the malaise that I saw in society, and definitely within my own experience of the world. And I actually honestly thought that I was putting together a kind of brochure for an alternative way of living, and so I took out all the kind of hardcore stuff that in fact would have sold me a lot more books and got me a lot more press, but I wanted to show them making porridge and all the stuff in between, and I just thought this was where everyone should be. So it was a kind of a brochure for a different way of living, and it's with a lot of a lot of things, the beauties in the stuff in between things, right?
There's a lot of people from because the period really if I can give a bit more background, is that you were travelling for 10 years, really.
On and off, yeah.
On and off.
On.
On. You're still in touch with people. Are people still part of that world? Do you feel part of that world
currently
still?
I live on Skye in a small crofting village, so not particularly up there. Yeah. But yeah, of course, with the internet, we can all stay in touch, and I suppose I described it to stating the obvious. I described it to someone once as yes, I have my own close friends. The address book got smaller when I had a baby, and I kind of changed stuff. But I suppose I could describe it as I feel like I could pretty much turn up in any city in sort of Northern Europe and be put up for the night quite happily by either someone I knew or someone that knew that I was okay for some reason, because I've been part of the scene. So that's a good feeling. Yeah.
But when you in your book, you kind of don't pull any punches when it comes to talking, giving giving information that people might not want to be publicly known about certain things, whether that's new techno, where we are now in our business techno. Did you approach people who didn't want to be involved? Did people try and were people quite protective over their story, over their or over their part of the story? Because I noticed there are quotes that are given to you, there are quotes that aren't given to you. Yeah,
Yeah, so there's two kind of areas where I would have really loved to have had some slightly deeper conversations with people. And the first one actually relates quite closely to some of the sort of feelings underlying Vinca's experiences. So there was a very different type of alternative way of life, alternative community that I was really fascinated in, that I wasn't really able to get anyone on the record about. And it's basically a rave church service that took place in Sheffield in the early 90s. So it was started by a bunch of evangelical Christians who were running a kind of radical left-wing commune in a shared house in Sheffield in the kind of late 70s, early 80s. They, in the early to mid 80s, founded a synth pop band, which they toured with Cabaret Voltaire and The Fool. They turned down a support slot for U2 because U2 were too overtly Christian. Their whole idea was to use youth culture as kind of a vector to smuggle Christianity into the hearts of the youth. And then obviously Sheffield becomes kind of the epicenter of UK dance music in the late 80s with Forge Masters and the creation of the Warp record label. These guys go out clubbing, take their first pill, and see the face of God.
Yes.
We have to start throwing parties. So they started something called the 9 o'clock service, so called because of the time that it started. So on a Sunday evening after Evensong, they'd clear all the pews out, wheel in a sound system and a smoke machine, and throw these kind of crazy half rave, half Eucharists that were, by all accounts, completely incredible. There's an audio recording of it and a few bits and pieces of video. And because it was this kind of radical alternative group of people, there were loads of DJs, loads of artists, loads of graphic designers, loads of sound engineers, people who'd been in bands previously. It was miles away from your stereotypical kind of trendy vicar shit. It was seriously really, really good. Some of it sounds a bit to me like leftism by Left Field, but with someone reciting the Lord's Prayer over the top. It's scarily credible, and it blew up. It became this mass phenomenon. They were turning people away at the door of a church for a church service, and the Church of England spotted this, and rather than clamping down on it, went fully behind it. They gave it loads and loads of political and financial support. Sheffield Council gave them a sweetheart deal with Peppercorn Rent to occupy the basement of their new civic leisure centre. It became this kind of mass youth phenomenon, and it was potentially going to be this whole alternate way of combining kind of Anglican religion, which at the time still exerted a really strong hold over British kind of social structures, with this kind of emergent dance music. And then in the summer of 1995, it turned out, as these things always do, that the charismatic preacher at the head of this congregation had been basically sexually abusing everyone. And the whole thing, there was this very brief tabloid scandal in the summer of 1995. He resigned the priesthood, disappeared. There were rumours that he'd gone to LA to be a rave promoter. He in fact started a design agency in Manchester under a different name. All very murky. But yeah, I basically tracked down a couple of people who'd been involved in this Sheffield-based Christian rave cult for 5 years. But yeah, they were all very, very sceptical about talking on the record, so I wasn't able to get any really kind of detailed stuff. I have seen that there is a documentary that's been commissioned by Channel 4, so I suspect that story may be coming out.
Yeah.
I've chatted to some of the people involved in the documentary, and they are keeping their lips very, very tightly sealed, so I suspect that there may be legal things happening as a result of that. So yeah, so that was kind of my white whale for the book, the story that I really, really wanted to dig into more but didn't have an opportunity to.
I think it's really interesting listening to that, because I was doing a bit of research into this idea of collective joy and some of the sort of public art spaces I've been occupying, I was going to say, but invited to do it. And I did an exhibition about collective joy called Social Honey. But anyway, I was researching this idea of, when we came together and how we used to come together and looking into ecstatic dancing. And actually, early Christian churches didn't have pews, and everyone danced and ate, and it was just basically they believed that through this kind of ecstatic dancing and communal dancing that, well, you ended up with communicating directly with God in your own sort of space. And the church on a higher level didn't like this, so they wanted to shut this down because they lost all their power if the common person could communicate with God without them. So they started to say you can't dance in the church anymore, and people started dancing outside. You were allowed to dance outside, and then, as we've seen, that wasn't really enjoyed either by the authorities. But the bit in between kind of that and now is actually carnival. So carnival has never been able to be suppressed, and it was always a kind of just about accepted form of the people being able to kind of subvert. And a big part of carnival was always the commoner dressing up as the Lord, and the Lord dressing up as the commoner, and so yeah.
And that links directly into UK dance music via Notting Hill Carnival, obviously. So that's an extension of, so across the British Empire, carnival traditions were suppressed. That same kind of power struggle erupts in the streets of West London. That then becomes deeply enmeshed with reggae and dub sound system culture, continues to be a source of kind of moral panic, despite the fact that there are fewer arrests per capita at Notting Hill than there are at Royal Ascot, which is a statistic that I love. But yeah, those threads carry all the way through, and there's a really good book called Dancing in the Streets by an author called Barbara Ehrenreich, which is the other, along with Energy Flash and Altered State, is kind of the third book that I was hoping to kind of build on. It goes all the way back to the kind of earliest Neolithic rituals through the secularization of carnival as dancing is no longer allowed within churches, so people kind of take it into a secular space. It touches on things like the carnivalization of sports, so modern sporting activity and sporting theatre as a kind of a collective release of emotion, and goes all the way up to rock and roll, but weirdly misses out dance music. It was written in 2006, but doesn't talk about raving at all, although I guess it was written by an American author, so maybe they just hadn't caught up by then. But
are you going through some more of your photos?
Yeah. So
this is the one
how's
I used.
everyone feeling?
Feeling
A little bit more.
Yeah, a bit more. And then we can get some questions from the audience. I just feel like the selection of photos of Vinca sent are great, and I wonder if there's any stories behind them. This one that I used for the poster, again, it's like it could be a photo of 100, 200 people there, but it isn't. What's it? Where was this?
I mean, yeah, you can imagine, like you say, you can fill in the people, but it, I suppose it shows the individual experience of something, and on a very basic level, I think Ed's done really well in bringing us into our minds and bringing us back into our bodies. I think one of the most extraordinary things that I experienced with especially those big old sound systems was literally being inside the music, because the speakers were all around you and the bass was going through you. If anyone's ever been to one of the old school dub reggae sound system concerts, I mean, I can never get further in from the entrance than about a metre, because I literally can't breathe because of the bass. But and yeah, that's actually a woman, and she's having a great time, and obviously you can't hear, but there's some very loud music playing all around her. And what more can I say? Yeah, one of my, obviously this is, I mean, doesn't everyone love that? This is one of my favourite. It's that thing of when you come together and you're on a mission and it's all a bit illegal, but it's sort of big enough to not be stopped. And if people remember the borders in Europe, it used to be quite hardcore, some of them. You know, you would drive up to them and you would start thinking, shit, where did I put that spliff? I mean, I don't even smoke, but we have one. You know, like whatever. And you'd be like, oh God. And then, you know, the passports, and you really needed everything in order. Well, we just turned up and caused chaos. And it was a beautiful kind of liberating sort of feeling that you just turned up and you kind of opened the truck doors and all the dogs got out and started weeing on everything, and like, you know, and the kids sometimes came out and they were sort of trying to check passports, but all we wanted to do is have a wee and fill up our water butts, and you know, it was kind of, it almost like ignore everyone, and that, you know, it was a, maybe that's a police car behind us, actually. I've never noticed that.
This seems to be directly related to the one before, which is looking at a map.
Yeah.
It's called Where Next. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was in one of, I put together a series for an exhibition I did in London a couple of years ago, called Raves and Riots, because I mean, that's another story, but I feel that they're very similar at certain points. You know, there's a point in which a lot of people arrive at a rave not necessarily wanting to break the law, and a lot of people arrive at a protest not necessarily wanting to break the law, but then when you're faced with an authoritarian force, which is basically just saying, you're not allowed to dance anymore at a rave or at a protest, it's like, you can't believe what you're believing anymore. It's, you know, it turns a lot of people into rebels. Anyway, this is yeah, again, with the convoy, just those beautiful moments where you kind of were coming to the end of your welcome or your stay or your party, and you just looked at the map and said, where should we go? And that was a nice thing with paper maps. Fucking nightmare once you start driving, but yeah.
Speaking of riots, and you've got some protest photography in here as well, and I thought this was like a rare moment, surely.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had the photos afterwards as well, which were like just the other policeman just looking and going, what the fuck? And you're going, I don't really know, I don't know what happened, but that sort of spanned a lifetime of myself asking policemen for kisses. A lot of them kind of just want to cuddle, really, for let's face it. Yeah. I mean, that's everyone here, no? Sunrise?
Yeah.
That was in Italy, at a technical in Italy. One of the things that was quite interesting about European sound system culture was how different parts of Europe were then more than now, and also how different the ravers were. So you would always have, like, you went to France and there would be a lot of people coming up to you and saying, oh, you know, what tribe are you? Like, oh, you know, and they'd be like, do you live in this truck? You know, really wide-eyed and like, wow, and kind of got a bit rock starry at certain points. Not me, and then you'd have the kind of Italians, and they'd be like really into parties, but you were doing it for them. You were like putting the party on for them, which was fun too. And then it was down. You had to go down to like Spain and Portugal, where it was like, yeah, we're just all the same. We're just doing parties together. You know, we've been doing it non-stop. You just got it again. So yeah. Oh, and the Germans were brilliant because everything was technically really on. You know, amazing. I used to love hanging out with them.
There's a couple of these that are from, like, I was looking at these for so long earlier. These two, like,
that is
what?
A moment of joy, isn't it?
It is joy.
It's subversive.
It is. What is
What's happening?
Yeah, where is it? Where is it? And when is it? And what's happening?
Oh, I love those loops in history, right? So, you know, it wasn't a nice thing, but was it Susan Everard that got murdered by the Seb Everard? That was it. And then there was a hashtag and a movement around that called Reclaim the Streets. And so I got some of their jewellery. It says Reclaim the Streets. But this is the original Reclaim the Streets, which was something very different. I don't know if anyone went to any of those. Yeah. Yeah. So basically an organisation that was in a very early kind of, I guess, climate protest organisation, but basically about the fact that cars were taking over everywhere, wanted to reclaim streets. And they would do this in, like, this was a big 2-lane sort of street. I think it was in Tottenham. And they would just you know, that all those things that we see now. You know, I'm actually doing an exhibition around protest and how we are supposed to protest now, but in those days there was the early form of kind of stopping traffic by moving slowly and then stopping. So they took over this street for the day, and as usual, you know, everyone gets together and it gets a bit dark, and their props, which were these two very old cars, had been like gradually smashed up during the day by like kids and stuff, but they were still just props, and then someone set fire to them, of course. So, and this is actually just quite a brief moment, and this isn't a riot. He's called Riot Boy, and the next one's called Riot Girl, because, but it was just a brief moment that these cars were alight and everyone was running through in between them just because of the thrill of it. She was a primary school teacher at the time. And they kind of, I think was it Cider Super Brew or one of those ones. And that's it. That's actually at the V&A now. They bought it in 2000, and you can see it up at in their free space, free new photography space. And she's rather beautiful.
Wow! Congratulations, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Should we open it up to some people from the audience? If anyone's got any questions, it could be for Vinca, it could be for Ed, it could be for all of us, or something you want to throw in there. Yes, my friend here.
Alright, I'll kick us off. Where do you see the future of techno music, Ed, in the next 5 years?
So we've sort of, for anyone who didn't hear, the question was, where do I see the future of techno, or I guess dance music in general, in the next 5 years? For me, it's precisely that thing that we were speaking about a minute ago about smallness and operating under the radar. The most interesting things that I've experienced in the last few years in dance music have not been kind of the big festival headlines set, audio-visual spectaculars. All of that feels a little bit like prog rock to me. It's like that big kind of stadium size extravaganza that dance music is very good at and that loads of people enjoy, to me is a little bit drained of kind of political or social energy. All the best parties I've been to recently have been small, and not necessarily small in the sense of, oh, this is really cool and no one's found out about it, but small in the sense of operating from and for a very specific community, whether that's a local community of interest, a community brought together by shared bonds of identity and heritage, or simply out of a kind of shared determination for the thing that they're making not to grow above a certain size. And those parties seem to have more in common with the sort of things that Vinca's been talking about, that sense of kind of identity, of commonality, and I find that a really interesting kind of re-establishment of that at the centre of dance music. It's not just about going out to the loudest, fastest party you can find. It's about building something with people whose names you know, or who have something in common with you. And out of that, I think, has come the other thing that I'm really interested in and excited by, which is an increasing understanding amongst sort of promoters, DJs, artists and dancers of dance music's role as a kind of catalyst for other forms of community building. So a lot of the parties that I mentioned in the book that I'm really excited about tend to take as their kind of end goal something more than just a night of dancing. So it might be that the party is the catalyst for, so there's one festival in London called Dialed In, which is specifically by and for artists and dancers who have South Asian heritage. And the parties are kind of the catalyst, the big hypey boiler room sets are the things that you noticed first. And then there is a whole network of workshops, of capacity building, of communal kind of skill sharing, educational work, mentorships. It's a whole kind of community of solidarity, of which the dance floor is just one part. And I think that an increased kind of literacy around the social and cultural function of dance music outside of the club is perhaps kind of the next thing that I'd like to see more of in the future.
Yeah, great. You made a good point when we spoke before, which was about the dance floor's always been political, and people now, certain people are now realising and harnessing that, power for wider social change. Yeah, hello, my friend with the glasses.
A question for Vinca. What years do your photographs span?
In No System, pretty much I've got 3 books. The first one is No System, but chronologically there's a book that starts before that called Future Fantasy, which was literally leaving school, going to my first raves. And then No System starts in 1994. These pictures are all from No System, and goes on till about 1999.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. Wiz.
Question for both of you. Was there, in your opinion and experience, ever a potential, perhaps Castle Morton being one of this moment, when there was some serious revolutionary potential, in the sense that you had a whole generation of people who were embracing a different sense of community and reality?
Yeah, so to on the mic, if you didn't hear that, anyone, Wiz asked if there was ever a moment that either of you felt, or that you noticed, that you came across, that there was potential for real revolutionary action, thought. Did you either of you come across that or experience that? Is that fair to say? Yeah.
I just because I know you'll do it more succinctly, I'll just do the more anecdotal side of it. I think for me, what happened at Castle Morton was that so many people came together, despite all the efforts of all the police over the previous years to break this up, and so many people came together, and so many people that were not interested in breaking the law, but they were interested in being in this place together, and they were prepared to break the law. And being shut down.
Turn them off.
Is that it? Oh, we're back, baby! The man won't keep us down. Sorry, yeah, where were we?
No idea what I was talking about. Yeah, no, actually, I do remember. So, yeah, Castle Morton. Who would forget that had been there? So, very briefly, what I saw happen that night or that week was the fact that, the police were like, okay, this is, despite all our efforts, this is getting out of control. And it was terrifying for the authorities because of this massive mix of people. So you had the travellers, the ravers, but also what you had that weekend, for some reason it went out on loads of the pirate radio stations. So loads of people came down from London, and it was just a complete mix of people, and no one gave a fuck about all the police roadblocks and everything, and just had such an amazing time. And it was from that point on, I think, not only did Spiral Tribe go to court, but there was an organisation called the Advance Party Network, and they didn't have a sound system, which was really unusual then. But they were set up to help us all put on parties. Now they all got arrested in a really weird way, and I think, if my memory serves me right, they were charged with conspiracy to
commit a breach of the peace. But the charges were dropped before they got to court in quite
So
suspicious.
wasn't there something about treason in there as well? Something about basically overturning all forms of authority up to the Queen.
Yeah, I think some of the charges that people were faced with
were just ludicrous.
Insane prison terms potentially.
But it was just faced with that. It was just faced with the fact that we all got together and really, really, really wanted to dance that week. Terrifying stuff for the audience.
In terms of revolutionary potential, though, I think one of the things that's important to remember in the context of kind of Castle Morton and rave, I'm not sure necessarily that everyone going raving or going to Castle Morton had a shared goal of kind of establishing an alternative culture. Where I think that was relevant is 6 or 7 years earlier, with the New Traveller convoys and the Battle of the Beanfield. And I think, so for those who don't know, the Battle of the Beanfield was an attack in 1985 on a traveller convoy that was trying to get to Stonehenge. The police essentially pushed them off the road into a field, and then like hundreds of riot cops descended, smashed up all of their vehicles, dragged people out, beat them all up.
That's
And
children as well.
Yeah.
Children literally ripped out of their beds and pulled out of the vehicles,
Yeah.
watching their parents getting hit with truncheons and their homes being smashed up, all the windows of their buses.
And I think the New Traveller convoy was really an attempt to establish some kind of alternative social structure in a way that raving maybe was not quite so overtly utopian in that sense. And with the Battle of the Beanfield, the state made it very, very clear that when the stakes got high enough, they would have no hesitation in stopping that by force. And I think the entire Free Party scene was conducted with that awareness in the back of people's minds. It was, I think, much more transitory. I don't think, from my reading of it, I'm sure that some people who were there at the time will think differently. Spiral Tribe certainly talk about the Free Party scene as potentially kind of sparking a revolution of the masses. From the outside, and from someone who wasn't there in person, the Free Party scene never seemed to me to embody quite that kind of overt revolutionary rhetoric. I think what's interesting about dance music is that often its political energy kind of dissipates when it gets forced into traditional forms of political campaigning. The campaign against the Criminal Justice Act seems to get a lot less exciting halfway through when the Socialist Workers' Party turn up with their placards and their slogans and start doing their usual SWP type thing. There was one of the people I interviewed was involved in the Advance Party and the sort of anti-CJA coalition, and they described turning up to one of the meetings, and a bunch of people that no one had ever seen before was sitting in the meeting room. They were like, "Who are you?" And they said quite pompously, "We are the Coalition Against the Criminal Justice Act." And the person I interviewed said, "Well, we're the Coalition Against the Criminal Justice Act. Who the fuck are you?" And it turned out that they were an SWP front group. And it was just, all of that stuff, I think the revolutionary potential of rave, I think, comes from, as you say, that kind of mass civil disobedience. I'm not sure that the Free Party scene in the 90s was ever going to topple the state in that direct way, but I do think that the energies that it perpetuated, the narratives that it created, do, I think, feed into that same revolutionary urge. It's like, I think it's a misquote, but when that Chinese politician was asked what were his thoughts on the French Revolution in like 1980, he said it's too soon to say. I think it's probably too soon to fully assess the revolutionary potential of that era or UK dance music in general, because it's still ongoing.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, but I also think that beyond the dance floor there was something else going on. So on the back of No System, I kind of pointed out the fact that we didn't want to rebel against the system so much as live outside it. So in terms of a lifestyle, I think that was the rebellion that I felt was going on, was less of a kind of fighting, which often governments encourage, change everything for it all to stay the same, I think So I think that idea of maybe Brighton epitomises it in some ways, or used to, or still does in places. It's just living your own way. It's as rebellious as fighting sometimes.
Yeah, my friend at the back, you might have to speak quite loudly if that's okay.
Do that. Hello. I really like what you just said about living outside it. I'm also very nearly 50. And I really also love that picture of the woman on top of the hill being asleep, because that's what I can relate to quite a lot on a kind of outside journey. But also, I was never going to live outside the system. That's just not how I'm built. But I had some formative experiences, and I had some raves in caves, and that helped shape who I am. And that's just as important to be a person kind of who accepts that I just don't have the bones to live completely outside it. But therefore, it shapes who I am, and I change a little bit of the mainstream as a result of that and those formative experiences. And listening to you both earlier, I really wondered, or if anyone else knows, does it still go on? Like, of course I'm not going to know. I'm 50 and the head of user centered
Does
design.
what specifically still go on?
But like, do like raves in caves and meet ups.
Oh yeah.
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 It's
They're at it. Yeah.
The question what the question was for anyone who doesn't know was that feeling that what seems to be captured in some of these photos and what Ed talked about and what we're kind of what we associate with that countercultural element of rave, is that still happening? You know, do people still throw those illegal raves? I would say yes, because I've been to quite a few, but do you know what? It links to a question I was going to ask as well. Yeah, I was going to say anyway, answer. Maybe you answered all.
Well, I think that thing of like, if you've been to a rave or been to any kind of extraordinary experience, then you have a certain amount of freedom within your own mind afterwards. So it's really nothing to do with necessarily repeating an experience over and over again, but it's about, and also who can control that, you know, who can control, you know, your mind and your memories and your laughter and your joy in a lot of ways as well, and I find that an incredibly source of rebellion in the modern age is humour. What's that got to do with rave? Don't know a lot actually. I had a very funny experience with raves, but you've been. Why don't you tell us about it? I mean, I know these raves are going on. I follow some people on Instagram.
Yeah, well, do you know what? I'm not out there every weekend, but Yushi made a good point. Yushi, our photographer friend who spoke last month, a few weeks ago at the Sound Effects, and he was talking about, he had photos of illegal raves that he went to the week before he came here, that he had photos of, that were in Second World War hideouts under London, under Borough in London. Now these massive signs, we can do it behind, these massive painted murals from the World War II that they'd broken in through the back of the record shop, got in the basement, knocked the wall through and got into this thing. And he was showing the photos, I took these last week, I was thinking, fucking hell, that's like a timeless photo.
And it wasn't AI or something.
It wasn't AI, and I was thinking like, wow, that's stuff. I was like, imagine that, you dancing, you know, amongst the ghosts of World War II in London. And he said, I left the train station, I could feel the rumbles underneath the pavement, and that's how I found out what it was. So it's still happening. It's definitely still happening.
If anyone's got a copy of Party Lines, they could hold it up as well, just as a little example. There we go. That photo was taken in 2020, lockdown era rave. It looks exactly like it could be from Vinca's book. It looks no later than 1994, but actually that's from a lockdown rave in Banwyn in Wales. So
or
this culture,
from a pagan dance.
Yeah, exactly.
200 years before.
Yeah.
Illegal raves are continuing to happen in largely unaltered form and in new, more exciting forms all across the UK, probably as we speak.
I'm going to take one last question, I think, and then we can all chat with each other. We can hang out here. We've got it up here as long as we want. But I think that seems like the right thing to do. Do you think? One more question, then we can.
I'm getting fidgety.
Cool. All right. Well, I have one more question from maybe a woman around the corner there. Yes, my friend with the blonde hair. And you're quite far out. Go on.
Yeah, sorry. To me, there were two words sort of that both start with a C that I had expected to hear and didn't ever come up. And that's class and capitalism. Because to me, a large part of, yes, if you're saying, okay, they broke the wall down, blah, 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 in London, so it's still happening. I mean, I lived for 16 years in the UK and I decided that I couldn't go to a club here because I came from Berlin clubbing scene. And to me, clubbing, like as an official, not as in something illegal, just made no sense because it was so controlled. There were so many scans of my passport taken. Everyone kept checking that those were not two girls, which was actually the case, snogging in the toilets, but that they weren't taking drugs. So to me, that made zero sense. And I think some of the things that happened first in London and then later, also I would say in Berlin, but also in many other places, is actually that large-scale capitalism hedge funds moved in and so on, bought up a lot of things, and that's also because you mentioned a lot like the squatting movements. And I would say squatting is maybe not dying out completely, but it's becoming so much smaller than what it was. So for me, that's kind of missing, and that's what I would like to hear your thoughts on, especially the role that the British class system might have played in it dying out earlier, or being marginalized to like 200 people earlier than in other places.
Yeah, so the question was about class.
And
about how
capitalism.
we haven't mentioned class, and also squatting becoming harder. One of the things that it is different now, squatting is actually more difficult.
It was class and capitalism.
Class and capitalism, sorry, I didn't get the second word, sorry. Class and capitalism, yeah. And those things haven't been mentioned, you've realised. And that when they play into where we're at now, I guess. Sorry to paraphrase that, it is a bit, I didn't mean to paraphrase, but just because I'm so far out. Class and capitalism, how does it play into where we're at now? And you rightly mentioned squatting as something is way more difficult to do, and also squats and that culture was where a lot of ideas and things came from. I always think this, sorry, I'm going to answer that little part of the question, but I always think this when I speak to people who grew up, who were active, politically active, or in parts of subcultures or counterculture. In the UK, for example, in the 70s and 80s, they're always, it was so difficult, it was hard, Thatcher came in and made it all difficult. You think, yeah, that sounds really rough. I think but at least you could fucking squat a whole street in Brixton. You can't do that now. It's like worse now somehow. People look back and go, that was really brutal, and the way things were hard. And then out of hardship came all this. Those opportunities seem to have been taken away. Like, I think squatting is a good example of that. Where you think, yeah, it was bad then. It's worse now. It's just been getting incrementally more difficult to start grassroots movements based on squatting, I guess, is a good point. But yeah.
I think squatting gave you the two really important things. Well, a freedom from the tie of having to come up with a rent every week is the obvious one, and time. So because you weren't having to work continuously, you had time to then be creative, and you were in a creative environment, and yeah.
So it's interesting, one of the people that I interview at the end of the book is a dance music producer and DJ. He was also one of the Stansted 15. People don't know that trial. They were a bunch of activists who essentially blocked a deportation flight from taking off, were subsequently tried and acquitted. And he made a conscious decision to get into squatting because he was tired of the dance music industry. Like, he'd had a certain amount of success, he was working a day job and DJing, and he thought, I need to do something different. So he kind of gave up dance music and got into squatting and got into activism, and ended up being part of this kind of anti-deportation action, which struck me as a really interesting inversion of the traditional history of people who got into squatting and then got into raving through that. So I do think your point about the narrowing of space in which people can operate without contributing to some sort of capitalist structure is absolutely right, to the extent that it's very difficult to form a life in which those two coexist. If you're squatting now, you are going to be far more easy to evict because of the additional squatting powers that have been brought in over the last 10 to 15 years. You're not necessarily always going to have that time or space that Vinca spoke about to pursue your kind of creative interests. And it's also just a question of physical space, right? The development of British city centres means that there are fewer empty warehouses to make use of for parties. That kind of early rave scene occurred at a very specific point in history where there were these kind of post-industrial spaces that hadn't yet been converted into WeWorks or luxury loft apartments. The one thing I would say though is that dance music has always flourished in spaces that are inhospitable. And I think it's easy to get quite pessimistic about the way that society has shifted and the space that dance music occupies within that. I'm thinking particularly of writers like Mark Fisher, if anyone knows him, who is a great writer, but carries in his writing this certain sense of kind of nostalgia and loss of this society, or this optimism and cultural flourishing that was possible within this kind of brief historic window, and has now been flattened out by the all-consuming nature of capitalist greed and capitalism's ability to assume anti-capitalist themes and identities and signifiers into itself. my thinking is slightly different. I think that even in these times where the space kind of narrows further and further, there will always be spaces for this stuff to happen, regardless of pressures of class or money or power or space. Dance music has thrived in spaces far more inhospitable than we occupy now. That fundamental urge for collective release of a collective assumption of space without permission has been a feature throughout human history, and there's no reason why the specifics of the moment that we exist in right now will blunt or deaden those needs for us to kind of congregate together illicitly and freely.
Great.
People are doing Zoom raves.
Exactly.
Lockdown.
So can you put your hands together, please? For Vinca Petersen and Ed Gillett. And we'll do one of the photos right at that. So next, in a couple of weeks, so I run this as a monthly night, and it's always different speakers, and this is the rave special, but I do this with 3 different speakers that speak about different genres or different subcultures or music or whatever. So you'll have heavy metal next to hip hop, next to pop, next to some obscure classical avant-garde band. And so next month, in a couple of weeks, we've got Julia Toppin, who's going to talk about the women of the jungle and drum and bass scene, the forgotten women of the jungle and drum and bass scene. We've got Nee Parks, who's a great poet and author, and he's going to talk about how music plays into how music works in his life as a novelist and a poet, and the influences on his new novel Azuka. And we got Professor Lucy Robinson, who's actually gracing us with her presence tonight. She's over there. And she's going to take us on a journey through the 1980s, a unique journey through the 1980s. That's it. I hope you've had a nice night, and give yourselves a round of applause. Another round of applause for the speakers. And please come and speak to Vinca, speak to Ed, please speak to myself, speak to each other. You know, this is your night, this is your community as well. And that's it. Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, 1 second. And we also have Vinca's book for sale. It wasn't out earlier. It is now. Ed's sold out of his book already, which is good, isn't it? He bought loads. He's sold out of tonight, but they are available elsewhere. Vinca's got her books here, so please go and check them out. Buy one. And I'm going to put some tunes on. I spent a long time making this playlist. Ed, do you want to say anything? Okay, you're hovering near the mic, that's all. Cool. Cheers.